For decades, there was no public discourse about the phenomenon called the menopause. For far too long, there has been significantly little science investigating women's health. Thankfully, this is changing. Menopause is now a very hot topic with so many different platforms, from telehealth to menopause specialists, now focusing on this part of women's lives. Today's show is talking about menopause with Dr. Liz Lyster, an OBGYN with a special interest and focus on healing in the menopause. Welcome to Gyno Curious. I am your host and creator of the show, Dr. Amy Novatt. From both sides of the speculum, we are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please send us any comments or concerns to comments@radiofreerhinecliffe.org or gynocurious@gmail.com. Please consider giving us 5 stars on whatever platform you listen to podcasts and share the show with your friends. Dr. Liz Lyster is an OBGYN who has also earned a master's in community health education. She's a dedicated midlife health expert committed to enhancing women's overall well-being through every stage of hormonal change. With a holistic approach, she combines deep medical expertise with transformative advice, guiding her patients towards a life of vitality and joy. She's a celebrated author, speaker, and a compassionate caregiver. So I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Liz, as she goes by, joining me today. Hi there, Liz.
Hi, Amy. So nice to get to chat with you today.
I know. It's great. You know, I was reflecting on speaking to someone who is doing a lot of the same work that I am. And initially, there was this feeling, quite frankly, of like, wait a second, there's territory here. And then I realized, oh no, this is the patriarchy speaking in my ear, nudging me to edge out. And I am not interested in that anymore. So I'm so pleased to embrace all the practitioners out there who are talking about this time in women's lives and celebrating it and trying to work through the challenges, both in the science and the social venues and milieus. So, I guess part of what I'm curious about for us to talk about is, why is it that all of a sudden there's been this burgeoning of people talking about menopause, the telehealth companies selling products, those of us who are talking about the menopause on the air? What do you think is, why has menopause entered the zeitgeist now?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It sure has. First of all, I just want a quick comment on what you said about the territory, because I have had that experience when I see all the experts that are out there, who are great. And what I like to say about that is there are plenty of women who don't feel good and are not getting the help they need.
Touche.
So there's just plenty of space for everybody. The rising tide raises all the ships.
And also, what I want to remind our listeners is, I don't know, have you ever had the experience of going to see Dr. A and you're like, my friends love that person, but not me. I have to go see Dr. B. So
Exactly.
Again, my voice, my way of thinking may appeal to some, and for others, they want to listen to you. And I'm so thrilled that we're offering these choices.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we could go really off on a tangent of sisterhood and collaboration. But I think part of the answer to what you asked about why is it really hitting now, I've been saying for a long time, about a decade, that half of women in the US are above age 35. And perimenopause, as we know, is 10 or more years before actually going into menopause. And in addition to that, women are being told, in fact, my hairdresser this week was told she's late 40s. She's still having her regular cycle and she was having other kinds of symptoms. And her doctor's like, oh, well, your hormones are fine. Like, did 3 tests and told her that. So anyway, so I think a lot of movie stars are speaking up. A lot of women who are using their spotlight to talk about the fact that there's a lot to hormone health. It's not just once your period stops, that's menopause. There's so much more to it. And I think a lot of famous women are shining a light on that. I think that's part of why it's really, really getting out there.
I've wondered too whether it's got to do with the cohort of us women in the world of OBGYN who are also going through this transition in their lives and are
Yep.
saying, oh my gosh, I was never instructed about this in medical school. No one talked about it in our residencies at that time. And I need to know about this, not just for my own well being, but for all the ladies that I'm seeing who are going through this.
I agree. I think an interesting thing about our cohort of doctors is we were practicing before the Women's Health Initiative came out.
That's right.
I remember in residency, the attending staff lamenting that only 15% of women in menopause were using hormones and how good hormones were and how important it was and how we needed to do a better job talking with women about the benefits. And then along came the WHI, and which did so much damage and continues to do so much damage. As I like to say, all the scary headlines related to hormones are based on the hormones used in that study.
It's so true. It's
Bad.
interesting. You know, there are certain events in our lives that we kind of never forget. I never forget the day that study came out and the New York Times and Newsweek magazine. I mean, this is when print was still really popular. And I was inundated with phone calls in the office around, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. You didn't tell me about this. It was
Right.
just, it was so disruptive in
Yeah.
so many
It was
ways.
bad.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
bad. Well, as you probably recall, and I thought this at the time, and then recently I've learned the exact timeline. The press release came out before the study was actually published, where we could read it
Indeed.
and
Indeed.
see exactly what it said. And I remember when it came out because I lived in this Los Angeles area at the time, and I was trying to sell my house, and my realtor walks in and she like limps herself over to my sofa, and she's beet red and she's dripping sweat. And I had just heard the press release, so I knew exactly what had happened. She'd been yanked off of her hormones and she
Right.
felt horrible. And I already knew in that moment, just intuitively, that we were going to eventually learn. All these dramatic studies eventually make their way back towards the middle road, as opposed to this dramatic scare that took off way
Yeah.
ahead of the horse was way out of the barn before we as doctors could even get our hands on the study itself and really make heads or tails of it. So a lot of
Yeah.
damage.
Yeah. So we're going to come back to hormones in a moment. I guess I wanted just to learn a little bit more about you on a personal note. Are you willing to share how old you are?
Sure, absolutely. I am 59 at the time of this taping,
Great.
making plans for the turning 60.
Yeah, yeah.
Very,
It's a wonderful, exciting time actually.
yes, for sure.
I'm 63 and I am kind of realizing kind of all the wonderful things about getting older and all the challenges for sure. And I want to just focus on the reality of if you will, the challenges, because I need to tell you a little story. I was talking to a group of colleagues, and we were talking about how we want to change the narrative around the perimenopause and menopause. It's been so negative, so shaming, so just diminishing of ovary havers for so long. And so we were feeling really thrilled by our enthusiasm and the words we were coming up with to empower women. And I excused myself because I needed to go to the restroom. So I walk into the restroom, I turn on the light, and the first thing I say to myself out loud is, oh man, you look so tired. And I just started cracking up because here I had just been infused with all this positivism and and encouragement from these middle-aged women. And the first thing I did was be kind of critical of myself when I walked
Sure.
into the mirror. So can we
Yep.
talk about that? Because on your site about kind of positive transformation, joy, can we expand
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. First of all, that's hilarious.
I
And we
know.
all suffer from that. And as I like to say, we all look at the mirror and say much worse things to the person looking back at us than we would ever say to our close friends.
Right.
So I try to make a practice of that. And I've taken women's workshops where they taught that and put a little post-it note and, oh, body beautiful. And, like changing the talk, the self-talk, but it has to be an active practice. Let's see. So, uh, yes. Where did we want to go with that? I got
How do we,
excited about
yeah.
that.
No, it's true. Like, so do you have any strategies how to transform the kind of, if you will, kind of paternalistic
Sure.
negativism and shaming around us aging women into a more positive experience that's realistic.
Yes.
That's about our human vicissitudes, if you will.
Yes. Yes. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm very lucky. My family's from Argentina, and in South America, it's very different. Elder people are really honored and looked to for advice, like just treated very differently. I grew up in the multi-generational experience of traveling there and my grandma staying with us for months at a time, that type of thing. So I have I think I got a better head start when it comes to that. Also, the dancing, the movement is a very Latin thing, and that's also a matter of being in our bodies. I would say that that's one thing we could put on the list on this topic is practices that put us in our body. So one was what we just mentioned is being like practicing talking nicely to ourselves. the way we would talk to actual friends. So that's number one, like as an active conscious practice. And number two, keeping that in mind when we're doing activities that reconnect us with our bodies. So I think that women have a lot of women have a history of negative experiences of their body. It's a little, it's difficult to you're a teenager and then you got to deal with a period. Or if you didn't get your period, then it gets really invasive. And then, so there's the whole menarche part of our lives. And then for some women, reproductive, that can be challenging. It can be difficult. It can be traumatic as well as joyful and all the positives. And so reconnecting to our bodies in a positive way. And it can be as simple as breathing and relaxing during a pedicure or a workout at the gym, as opposed to like, oh, I have like a negative push myself through kind of workout. Or really, for me, it's Zumba. I, again, got the Latin theme going. I just love Zumba. It's really fun. It's very fun for me. I like to see when the other women, I always give like little props to other women in the class. Like if they're really getting into it, I'll say, oh, I saw you shaking it, like, because they would be embarrassed if they thought I knew, but I'm trying to flip it for them to, no, that's very cool. And go shake it.
I
There's a
love
couple of,
yeah, I love the words that you use, and I'm also going to expand them because you use them, but I want to point them out to our listeners. So again, kind of talking nice to ourselves. I like to think about what would I say to my daughter? So I have a 25-year-old daughter, and I want her to look at herself in the mirror and think nothing but smart, beautiful, empowered, intrigued, questioning, challenged at times, grit, all these things that I so rarely use when I reflect on myself. And I've in fact got all those things, but I forget, and particularly in the milieu of aging. So
yes,
yes, talking nice to ourselves, being in our bodies. Oh, absolutely. I mean, because
yes,
and particularly, I think that many of us get into the habit of doing the same activity over and over again. So it's like anything else, you eat the same food over and over again, you have sex the
right.
same way over and over again, like anything. It gets almost you almost forget the quality of it. It just
Yes.
loses itself. So making sure you shake it up, literally.
Yeah.
And I do that with tapping, or I do that with shaking, or I do it with When I go for my walks, I go fronts and backwards and side and jumping and just change it up so it's not just
Yeah.
the forward walk. But you also said things that I want to remind people fun, fun. When I speak to people who are aging, and quite frankly, people on their deathbed, they've often said to me, I wish I had had more fun in my life, had more laughter in my life. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in a community of women, which is also what you described, this Zumba class, where you're
Yes.
talking to other women about moving their bodies, enjoying themselves, this is about community, fun, laughter, and some spontaneity. So this isn't easy for all of us. We have
Right.
so much on our minds. We are working hard. We're spouses, we're parenting, we're community members, we're trying to make ends meet. Some of us are dealing with 2 and 3 jobs. We're single parenting. I mean, I want to honor all the women, and I want to remind people this is cis, non-binary, trans women out there. These are hard to achieve on our everyday life. What I think Liz and I are talking about is tapping into it. It doesn't have to define every day, but if you can tap into it on a regular basis, that's what's going to help invigorate a sense of yourself and
Yeah.
uh, relish being alive, not just aging, but being alive.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that. My sons, I don't have any daughters. My sons are 26 and 23 at this point in time. And that's a lot of fun. It's very, very exciting to shepherd them through this time. And I remember being in my 20s, I was very externally focused. I was very focused on what did other people think of me. I always say you really couldn't pay me to go back to that time of my life because that's the time of school and residency and establishing the career. That's that decade for a lot of young people. And I remember being very externally motivated. And that's why I think perimenopause and menopause and getting older is such an opportunity to totally reconfigure that. We can design it, we can think it. I was turning 40 and I was not very happy about it. And I didn't want to have a party. And a friend of mine was a little bit older than me. She said, you have to have a party because you'll regret it if you don't. And I trusted her. So I said, fine, I had a party. And she was right. I was really glad that I celebrated it. That's part of what you learn as you go along in life. Those of us who are fortunate enough to go into our 40s and then our 50s and 60s and better, we can design how we want to experience it.
Yeah, and you also brought up a point. I want to make sure that we honor that as parents or aunts or whoever we are in the life of young men, we also are teaching them so much when we talk about the aging body and particularly
Right.
how to be respectful of women as they age and to be open and honest about all the changes so that a man who is now 51 and his wife's vagina is drying, he's informed, he's aware, he's supportive. These are all such important parts of us as a community of human beings being well and respectful towards one another.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny. You just reminded me that before I wrote my most recent book, I set out to write a book. I actually have it all outlined to write a book that's basically for men to explain what's happening. And by the way, I went into menopause when I was 43. So I was really young. So
Mm.
I've had a lot of years to contemplate all of this and experience it and try different things. So that's helpful, I think, it informs what I do with my patients. So I set out to write a book for men. And right before I really got to work fleshing it out and writing the body of the book, I thought, I just had this idea. I should probably look online and see what already exists. So I looked, and there are a number of books. Then I started looking a little more deeply and reading the reviews. And I basically was able to determine that it's the women who purchased, like the reviews weren't even written by the men. The
Interesting.
reviews that women were buying the book for their husbands. So anyhow, it's my latest plan is to do something really short, like a cheat sheet.
Oh, good. Oh, I like that. I like it. Right.
You know?
It's kind of like, how to fit it in between. I'm going to be extremely sexist here, between the baseball games, like how to just look at it quickly, not feel oppressed by this information, and just how to incorporate it into, one's daily life. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to shift us a little bit, and thank you for sharing that you went through the menopause at 43, because you've already kind of answered the question around how your cultural environment informed you about aging.
Yeah.
But at 43, you were probably addressing some big questions. And one of the bigger questions was about, do I or don't I consider hormone therapy? So I'd like to kind of move into that because there's so much conversation right now about hormone therapy. We've already talked, or we discussed very peripherally, the Women's Health Initiative study that came out in 2002 and how it basically told every woman on earth to stop taking their hormones, and how difficult and devastating that was for so many women. So hormone therapy comes in a lot of forms. So can we unpack that a bit and talk
Sure.
about what you do for your clients with regards to hormones and how you think about them?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, I have a couple of analogies that I like to use. One is the hormone symphony. You've
Mm.
got you've probably heard that you've got all the different instruments in a symphony are all the different hormones, and they all need to be in a good place for the music to be beautiful. So that's one analogy that I like. Another analogy that I like is a tree, a big, strong, beautiful tree that has deep roots. It has a strong tree trunk, and then it has leaves and fruit on the branches. And so my approach is working at the root level for the most part. Sometimes we want to address the leaves and fruit, which are how we're feeling. That's the hot flashes, the sweats. If a woman's not sleeping, we really focus initially on getting her sleeping, controlling the temperature dysregulation, getting the hot flashes and night sweats to clear up. My goal is always 0 hot flashes or night sweats, which is a lofty goal, but that's the goal, right? But I also remind women that there are lots of hormones. Besides estrogen and progesterone, women have testosterone. A lot of women still don't realize that women have testosterone. Also, thyroid and adrenals. The trunk, as far as I am concerned, the tree trunk, the strength of the tree trunk is thyroid and adrenals working together, and thyroid as the conductor of the hormone symphony. So my approach really addresses all of that, which it allows us to keep all the doses lower. I am in the anti-aging world, but I'm not at the extreme in that world. I'm not aiming for everyone to have the hormone levels of a 20-year-old. That's not my goal.
Can you unpack that for us, please? Because I think that's an important, very important point in this conversation.
I describe it as a continuum of doctors and obviously all the other healthcare professionals that are out there. But especially with doctors, which I know best, both my parents are now retired doctors. That's an interesting side discussion too. So you got this continuum, right? And on one end is a lot of what we have in Western medicine, protocol driven. If you have something bad or straightforward, you're good. You're going to be fine. Plenty of doctors to help with bad illnesses, straightforward problems. You need your appendix out. You're good in today's system, such as it is a system. And then at the other extreme, I call that the doctors who take care of the movie stars. People can usually relate to that. Like everyone's read an article about some doctor who went to some foreign country and injected some movie star with something. So that's the other extreme. And I'm on this side of the middle. This side of the middle is preventive, looking at root cause, addressing the underlying cause, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptom.
Yeah. So, for
That's
the audience, if I may translate that and correct me if I'm wrong, allopathic medicine is the word, the descriptive for kind of the conventional medical environs here in the United States. And then we've all heard the words complementary medicine, functional medicine, integrative,
alternative, integrate.
alternative.
Yep,
That's right.
yep,
All these
yep,
other words. And
yeah,
and it can be kind of confusing what's what, but I do think kind of all of those descriptors are kind of where I think you and I both land, where we're interested in looking at really the basis for what's going on. I mean, I like to say I I I can't imagine just treating a symptom without asking someone about their home life or asking
right.
someone whether they're safe in their home or if
Yes,
if going to the doctor is kind of an opportunity or just a place of despair. Kind of getting the emotional psychological component to understand that person, but also to really tease out diet and exercise and lifestyle because we are this kind of beautifully complex amalgam of a lot of stuff. And that's what I'm hearing you allude to, that you're on this side of looking at someone from this very, well, you use the word holistic. And that
yes,
word is, that word I have some trouble with because it's been overused. What does it mean
sure.
to you? I think you've just explained that, but what if you would, what would you say to the audience? What do you mean by holistic, Dr. Liz?
I mean it at the most basic literal level, which is the whole person. Look like it's everything you just said. How is their marriage? How is their relationships? How is their work environment? How are their extended families? Are they sandwiched in between caregiving and caring for youngers and olders? All of the whole that's how I use the word holistic, as in the whole scenario, the whole person. That's how I see it.
And I think it's so important, right? In today's allopathic world where physicians are being asked to see people in 10 minutes, where we've
Right.
gotten so siloed in our specialties and then specialized, it's hard for patients. I know as a patient
Very
myself,
hard.
it's very, very tough. So
Yeah.
I think that this is a good segue because if we're talking about the emotional life of a human being, we think of emotion psychology coming from the brain. So there's more and more
Mhm.
conversation right now about how the brain, in contrast to the ovary or in addition to the ovary and the uterus, is a part of the menopausal experience. Can you talk about that with the audience?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, as we know, our bodies are constantly, the areas of our bodies constantly in communication with each other. So we got the brain sending out messages to the body, and the body also sends messages to the brain. That's why getting out on a nice walk can make you feel better. Moving the large muscle groups feeds back onto the brain and can really rebalance the chemistry and really help. So it's an ongoing, and that's what hormones are, is messengers. They're just chemical messengers. And the brain is critical. I mean, the role of estrogen in terms of lifting mood, the role of progesterone, calming the brain, helping with sleep and anxiety, the role of testosterone on the brain, which a lot of people associate testosterone directly with libido, which it does have a role. But testosterone, I call testosterone the confidence hormone.
Oh, I like that. Hmm.
It really, there's a lot of cartoons out there. You may have seen one where, a woman looks in a mirror and all she sees are things to criticize. And a man looks in the mirror and is like, hey, not so bad. Even if you really shouldn't think that.
I
Okay.
love it. Yep.
That's what he's thinking. And I believe that that is a function of testosterone, bathing the brain. All right. A lot of women, as we were in our 40s, and my friend group going through this, and women that I've worked with and helped through the perimenopause, menopause transition and into menopause, is where all of a sudden things you've done all your life that you know perfectly well how to do, all of a sudden you think to yourself, you get insecure and you wonder if you're really able to do that. one of my friends calls that afraid to cross the street.
Mm.
You've been crossing the street your whole life, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden we reach this stage in our life. So obviously that's at the level of the brain and the hormones that influence that, and getting those into balance. Again, not going for high doses of everything. That is one approach. It's just not my approach. But using, dialing things in, taking the time. The brain has to get used to it. Our image of ourselves is very important. That's one of the reasons I think that women regain, well, men as well, but one of the reasons that we as human beings, most people, if they lose significant amount of weight, they're at high risk of regaining it. The image we have of ourselves is very critical to success.
absolutely. So I don't want to get too granular, but I also want to tell the audience, there's more and more science being done by neuroscientists around the role of estrogen receptors in the brain and
Right.
how the diminished estrogen that's kind of defined by the menopause state is impacting brain function, the way the brain takes up energy and glucose. So this is all happening very, very rapidly, but kind of stay tuned because the science is going on now around what happens to the brain if you give hormone replacement therapy, how does that impact symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. But let's talk about, well, let's start with testosterone. Few people talk about testosterone when they're talking about hormone therapy. It sounds like you believe there's a role in giving testosterone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
I am partial to hormones. I always tell my patients up front, I'm not here to persuade women or men to use hormone replenishment, but I am definitely a fan. I do
yeah,
favor it.
and there are several ways in which we can get hormone therapy. Can you talk to the audience about those different ways in which they might get estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, et cetera?
Absolutely, you bet. Estrogen and progesterone are more straightforward for women to be able to get, testosterone for men as well. There are many approved by the FDA forms of bioidentical hormones. That's a word that I wanted to make sure we popped in there. The word bioidentical. I do think it was originally invented as a marketing related term, but I think at this point it has a true meaning, which is simply that the form of the hormone is similar or exactly the same to what the body used to make plenty of. And now we're dealing with decades of living without hormones, especially women. Men have just the gradual decline of testosterone, but we as women, we go through a very abrupt, bumpy transition into no hormones, at least as ovarian production, the ovaries do go into complete retirement.
Yeah.
So it's very important, even if we want to use bioidentical, a lot of doctors get into a little bit of a debate about, well, it should come from this or that pharmacy. Well, that's fine. I do use compounding pharmacies for a lot of what I do. However, there are plenty of bioidentical products that are available in FDA-approved forms that women can get from their regular doctors. Two important factors. One is that the progesterone, that one's especially important that it be bioidentical versus the progestin that was used in the Women's Health Initiative and that's been used in every other study that shows any problems with hormones.
Yeah. So another way of describing a bioidentical progesterone is micronized progesterone, just so that people out there
Sure.
are clear about
Thank
it.
you.
And
That's
and
the term for the doctor, yeah.
yeah, is the bioidentical hormone necessarily made by I want to make this really clear. So the bioidentical hormone is not necessarily made in a compounding pharmacy. What we want people to know is that there's now available bioidentical hormones through big pharma.
That's correct. That's exactly right. So that's important point number one is the progesterone be bioidentical, not the progestin. The other is that estrogen be used through the skin versus oral, if at all possible. Okay.
Right.
One of the things I like to talk about a lot is absolute risk versus relative risk. Okay. So absolute risk remains extremely small, even in the Women's Health Initiative. The absolute numbers that led to the whole fear of breast cancer, the absolute numbers were extremely tiny.
That's
Four
right.
additional women out of 10,000. Okay, so it was very, very tiny. And then, of course, all the benefits that didn't get paid attention to. But in any case, we know that oral estrogen stimulates the clotting factors formation by the liver. So if at all possible, we want to go through the skin. So that's patches from regular pharmacies. It is sometimes all the vaginal creams from regular pharmacies. And then there's also other compounded forms that I do like to use. It can be topical gels. It can be hormone pellet therapy, as long as it is not going orally so that we don't have that first pass effect on the liver.
Right, exactly. And this is kind of great news for everyone out there because there's so many ways now in which to get hormone therapy.
Yeah.
And so let's just talk about those absolute and relative risks just to point them out for folks
Sure.
who are wondering, gosh, am I a candidate for HRT or menopausal therapy now?
One of the ways I like to illustrate that, I talk about this in one of my books, is if you cross a street, on average, with the average national statistics, it's about a 1 in 5,000 chance of getting hit by a car. If you cross the street twice, you've just doubled your risk, but you're still 2 out of 5,000 times. So that's sort of like an easy, simplistic way. Then we have actual data, for example, with birth control pills, where the risk of a blood clot, again, we're talking oral estrogen. Okay, so we've got that.
And higher dosages.
And much higher doses. Thank you. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 2 out of 100,000 women. And then at a certain age, then that can increase to 4 out of 100,000 women. That's still 999,996 women who are not going to have that complication. And then, of course, if she smokes, then it doubles it again. Again, we're still talking very low absolute numbers. Meanwhile, the relative risk is doubling with these various factors, which sounds really terrifying.
Yeah, I always marvel at the kind of impact of these numbers. And it's so interesting how sometimes I just, this is an aside, because this is the only kind of example I can think of at the moment, is somebody will come in and say, oh, I've been diagnosed with a cancer.
Mhm.
And they tell me that if I take a chemotherapy, it will reduce the risk of recurrence by I'm just putting random numbers out there. It will reduce the risk by 72%. But if I add another medicine to that, it reduces it by another 5%. So you're going from 72 to 77. And I always say to women, and let's just say the second medicine has got a lot of side effects. It's
Yeah.
kind of daunting. And I
Yeah.
say to them, I really need you to kind of spend some time with 72 versus 77.
Mm.
And then the higher risk of you're getting nausea, vomiting, hair loss, whatever it is.
Yes.
And so we're always kind of weighing pros and cons, risks and benefits, but really thinking about these numbers and really understanding them, which is not always easy because the
No.
way, sometimes big pharma advertises things, the way media discusses things, it's so confusing, even to, I'm going to say for me, I'm a scientist. I know how to interpret science, and I'm left like, I got to really think about these numbers because I'm confused
Yes.
by them. And I'm
Yes.
also emotionally impacted by them.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We have a family friend I was seeing the other day. He's in his late 80s, and he was given something pretty innocuous, some kind of nasal spray, something like that. And he had the prescribing information opened up, that newspaper print thin,
The insert. Mhm.
giant package insert that tells you all the scary things that ever happened to anybody who came near this medication. He's like, I don't think I should do this because of this. I said, just put that away. Just, I don't know if I should tell our listeners that I don't read those. I really, I know the basics of medicines that I take, and obviously I know a lot about what I talk about with my patients, but the prescribing information is always very scary. It always includes, I remember learning about a new drug. This was a few years ago, and I'm learning about it, and they're presenting as a presentation about the drug, and it was something about pharyngitis, which is like drippy nose, sore throat, right? They obviously medicine, we make things sound very scary. I said, well, how can this medicine cause that? And the person said, no, it doesn't cause that at all. But we're required to report anything that happened to the people in the study for the year while we were studying this drug. So that's just crazy.
Yeah,
It's really, it's difficult to be a patient. You mentioned
it
that
is.
earlier. You're absolutely right. It's
And
tough.
I want to point out, as long as we're talking about hormones, that there's still a black box warning on vaginal estrogen vis-a-vis breast
Yes,
cancer. And the science is so, so clear. Uh,
correct.
just to be clear, one can use vaginal estrogen even if you've had breast cancer.
Yes.
The science is really demonstrating that. Now, there are many oncologists who don't agree, and I have to respect their opinion, but the black box warning should really be like taken off this
Yes.
laundry list of possible risks. But
Yes, you're
it isn't.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. I read recently of a group of doctors who are trying to have it removed, but the onus would be on the drug manufacturer to redo studies, which they're not going to do. I mean, the economics of that makes absolutely no sense, and it's not going to happen. So you're absolutely right. That's a perfect example of where one warning from one study with the wrong type of hormone gets applied across the board to everything else. It's a problem.
Yeah. So, can we talk about testosterone?
Yeah.
Um, let's start there.
Okay, perfect. So in the United States at this time, there are no FDA approved forms of testosterone for women. Canada has something, England has something, other countries have testosterone options for women. We used to have, remember, estro test, it,
Yeah.
but it was an oral estrogen. And I dug into that a little bit, and that company folded not for any reasons with any risks or bad outcomes with patients. It was strictly an economic proposition. They were probably negatively impacted, I'm sure, by the Women's Health Initiative making everybody be off of hormones at a large scale level. So testosterone needs to come from a compounding pharmacy. And quick word, compounding pharmacies are highly regulated. They are highly, highly regulated. It's contrary to popular belief. It's not just a Wild West. You hear about complications with sterile intravenous compounds, but we're talking about topical preparations. We're not talking about anything that is going to go intravenous.
I want to just hitch on to that. It's so true for so long. And I still think there are pharmacies, compounding pharmacies out there that are a bit like cowboys and cowgirls. So all I'd say is you use a pharmacy that's used by your sister, your mother, your aunt, your cousins, a community, and that certainly has been recommended by a clinician who interfaces with that pharmacy over and over again. And I would say the same thing
That's right.
about any pharmacy, quite frankly. There are CVS pharmacists out there who I don't want to work with. So it's the same thing. It's like
Yeah.
trying to get to know your community of doctors, your community of pharmacists, your community of compounding pharmacies. Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there are some especially that I know in the US that are so large that they actually are regulated by the FDA. So this just, little shout out to compounding pharmacies and their regulatory agencies. They do a lot of internal testing. They want their products to be good products. So testosterone can be under the tongue, made into little troches. It can be topical gels. It can be hormone pellet therapy. It can be injectable for women. That's not the usual way. We use pretty low dosing compared to men. So for men, for example, a sublingual for men, that wouldn't work very well because testosterone doesn't taste good. So the dosing that they need is usually going to be either with the hormone pellet therapy or with the injections. And a lot of men who are out there being told that they just have to live with it and they're just getting older. Again, little shout out there. to the guys. So for us, testosterone, it can have a very wide ranging set of benefits. After continuously reading in detail a lot of the studies, anything I can get my hands on, I feel confident that testosterone does not have any health adverse effects on women's health. There could be side effects. All right. This whole thing about facial hair as we get older, I don't know about you. Please tell me if you have any more information about this. I pin down every doctor that I can. I go to my dermatologist. I said, what in the world? I said, I measure levels on women. I know that they have very low testosterone and then they're getting the facial hair. So obviously there's a change in sensitivity of the receptors in the hair follicles. So there can be side effects, a little bit of acne, a little bit of facial hair. And I always tell women, and this is to a point you made a few moments ago, is life is about quality of life. When you were talking about side effects of things, quality of life is very important. So if I have a woman and I this is the spiel I give at the beginning when we're considering, I don't do testosterone at the very beginning. I like to introduce it after we get some other improvements happening. And I say, look, these are some potential side effects. They tend to settle down. That's what happened to me. So I went into menopause 16 years ago. I started using testosterone 9 years ago. So I had a few years to compare before and after. And that definitely happened. It definitely kicked up the skin, got a little active at first. And then for me, it settled down. For other women, there's other things that I do to control the side effects, but only if they're getting the benefits. If they like it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I often say to women, if after 3 months of working with a medication, quite frankly, of any sort, you're not getting any benefits or the side effects are just kind of miserable, then I think we need to move on. Now, sometimes it's about changing dosages. Sometimes it's about changing the way in which you take it. So let's just say you're using a gel. Well, maybe we switch to a cream or we switch to maybe we have to do an oral medicine because all the topical approaches just aren't working for you. But you don't have to spend, I don't know how you feel, but I don't think women have to spend a year trying to figure out whether medicine A is working for them. That's way too much. That just feels like, okay, honey, you can just wait it out. I won't do that.
I agree. I feel the same way. I tell women, and you'd be amazed how many times we really need reminding on this. If you don't feel good on it, stop taking it and let me know. I don't want you to tell me 3, 4, 5 months later that you stopped taking it because we would have done something different.
I know.
I wasn't going to tell you, oh no, you still have to take it even though you don't feel good on it.
I know.
I agree. Hormones can take a little longer, but generally speaking, I like the 3 months. I have the same kind of mindset about it. It depends. And plus, because we talked about this holistic approach and we're looking at thyroid and we're looking at adrenals, quick mention of adrenals in women, I think that one of the reasons we have higher incidence of certain illnesses like hypothyroidism and other autoimmune issues is that we power through using our adrenals.
Speak to me about that. Unpack that for us, please.
So adrenals, pre-menopause, we women get half of our testosterone from our ovaries, half from adrenals. The ovaries go into retirement. There's a thought out there that women's adrenals will rise to the occasion and take over all of the testosterone production. I can say that that's really not the case for most women. Maybe it's just the women I take care of, busy, full lives, working, families, etc. But I really feel
is there any other type of woman? Sorry, is there any other type of woman?
Not that I know. I don't know them, but I
sorry.
Maybe. Exactly. Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I just had to put that in.
I know, right? Exactly. Well, I just feel like men bathed in 10 or 20 times as much testosterone as we have. It's like a layer of protection. It's really like a layer against adrenal stress. Let me just be more specific for adrenal stress. So when we're not sleeping well, we're not feeling good, and we just muscle through, we eventually will wear out our adrenals. And adrenals are a perfect example, as you well know, that in medical school, we are taught only the extremes. There's adrenal failure, there's the Addison's, there's adrenal tumors with Cushing's, but there's this great in between.
Mm.
There's a big in between. We're just not taught about it. It's a lot of fun to do that evaluation and to help women improve their adrenal function, which often it helps with lots of things: energy, overall hormone balance, sleep. It's very essential.
And do you do that in a circuitous way by getting your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone more balanced so the adrenal doesn't have to work so hard? Or are you talking about supplementing with adrenal hormones per se? Cortisol, working on cortisol, that kind of thing.
Yes. Excellent. Wonderful question. I like to use, in addition to bioidentical hormones, which is probably the core of what I do working with people, I also like quite a few supplements that have a lot of data. Again, a whole nother realm not taught in medical school because it's not the disease, pharmaceutical, drug, doctor, authoritative doctor triangle. It falls outside of that. So supplements there's abundant data, particularly in the area of adrenal herbal adaptogens. A lot of people, there's a lot to read. The internet can be a little bit of a dangerous place to go. As I always say, I've never seen anyone go on the internet and feel better. However, there's lots to read and lots to see. And for better or worse, lots of supplements that aren't high quality. I always do everything pharmaceutical grade. I prefer brands that are sold, they're manufactured to doctor to patient. Those are my preferred brands that I generally stay with, because then you're going to get quality production and you're going to get results. To what you said earlier, people can tell if something's helpful or not. Not always at the beginning, but over time, we figure out what people need in the long run and what they need less of. So not
Right.
only the hormones, but supplements can be helpful too. Vitamins, vitamin D.
Yeah, we know certainly vitamin D, magnesium, these are things for our bones that
Yeah.
a lot of these vitamins we can get through our foods. But unfortunately, so many people do not eat terribly well. So they're not getting what they need. So supplements may absolutely be an important part of their staying well. So we're coming to a close. And I guess I just want to tap into you. You talked about you're kind of part of this longevity medicine phenomenon. And there was just an article in the Times about, delaying the menopause, and they're really focusing on the science of looking at how to slow ovarian egg loss. And it definitely is a subject matter that we could spend a whole nother podcast on.
Right.
So I apologize for ending with that, but because it confuses me. There's a part of me that says this is a natural phenomenon that like don't mess with mother nature, so to speak. I think that when we try to eradicate the menopause, we're also to some degree maybe not being kind to women and the aging process. And at the same time, when we spend almost 30 years, if we're lucky, in this state, and it's a place that some women suffer in, why would we ever want to do that? So how to mingle the phenomenon of cosmesis and chronic diseases that occur in this time, it's confusing to me. So how do you reconcile all this? Because after just speaking to you for a short time, I think we're on I don't know, we have the same ethics, if you will. And so how do you deal with this stew?
I like one thing in what you just said is that this could be used to perpetuate the youth worship.
Yeah.
And that would be terrible, in my view. I think that this could have limited applications. Women who have illnesses that's going to prematurely remove their ovarian function, I think that would be a breakthrough. women who, I had my kids in my 30s, which I lived in a couple different places in Southern California. And one area where I lived, I was the old lady at the park with the babies.
Right,
I
right.
was a decade older than the other moms that were there. And then I moved to another part of Southern California. I think that was from LA down to Orange County, something like that. And then I was the baby. These
It's
were
fascinating.
women. It was just what happened in my sphere. And so we as women, egg freezing is not a fantastic process yet. So I love options for women. I love choices for women. We direct humanity. I do think that that is what all the fuss is about. And so, if there's going to be science that will serve us, that we can use to our benefit, women who, for whatever reason, didn't have the opportunity and wanted to have a child by an internal process, and if that adds to her life, I am for that. But that's kind of my biggest concern is I like what you said. It's a natural process. And what I add to that is that we have a modern problem is that 100 years ago, most women didn't reach age 50. So living without hormones or without other restoration, let's just say, in our bodies was not an issue. And now it is. So
Yeah,
I want women to be empowered. I want women to have those options, choices. So science that's in service of that, I would say I am for that.
great, great. I am so thrilled that we got a chance to speak today, and I suspect we might have another chat in the future. There's just so many places in which, or ideas that we can discuss that are so important to empowering women and men, promoting well being, enjoying life. And I like to end Gyno Curious with talking about pleasure. And
Mm.
you've already alluded to things that give you pleasure, but if you had to share with the audience what two things really give you pleasure in your life, what might it be? What might they be?
Oh, I'm so happy that you're giving me two. Because it would really, my life would be just terrible without even one of these two things. One is dancing, moving my body. I was definitely raised with that. It's like, I don't understand people who can listen to great music and hold still. I
I
can't,
know.
I can't relate to that. So it's dancing and moving. That's one. And the other is travel.
Mm.
I just went to England with a dear friend. She turned 60 and her wish was to go to Ladies' Day at the Ascot races, and it was spectacular.
Oh, you have to
I,
tell me about your hat.
oh yes, definitely the hat. It was Ladies' Day, so it was like extra hats. It was super amazing. We were very blessed that we were able to go to that. But I love travel. My husband's from South Africa. My family's from Argentina. I've got family really in a lot of places in the world. And also with the service projects that he and I like to go do, we've been to parts of the world that are developing and in need of our support. And we love doing that as well. Love going there and working, not just the tourism, but love going, working, helping. It's pretty fantastic.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all that you contribute to the lives of vulva havers and to all of us who are trying to figure out just how to embrace aging with an understanding and knowledge, with joy, movement, and health. So, thank you, Dr. Liz Lister. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Mm. And thank you to Jen Hammoud and Maddie Rosenberg, who helped me co produce the show, and to the Epicurean who houses Radio Free Rhine Cliff. Until our next episode next week, please stay well and listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers. Be well.